Hello, everyone. Dear Chris, dear esteemed audience from UK, Germany, Sweden, Spain, Belgium, I see here. Welcome to the first webinar in a series organized by MIK, Miller International Knowledge, for IP4OS project 2025-2026. It is a new monthly webinar series designed to explore the intersection of intellectual property and open science. The sessions will bring together experts to share their insights and strategies from different sectors related to both fields. Today's webinar is about copyright for libraries with Mr. Chris Morrison, Head of Copyright and Licensing at the Bodleian Libraries, University of Oxford. I'm Eliana Tashler, Policy and Legal Director with MIK. Before I introduce our guest today, let me tell you some housekeeping rules and then a few words about IP4OS. Please write your questions in the chat for question and answer sessions that will follow the presentation. The questions will be, everyone will see your questions. You cannot chat to one to another, but you can post to everyone in the chat. So it's interesting for me to then select the questions. And you know the webinar is recorded. And a few words about our EU-funded IP4OS project. Our project aims to promote a concerted approach to agile intellectual property management and open science practices to better exploit the benefits of shared scientific and technological research and innovation, and to facilitate scientific knowledge valorization across Europe. It will produce a synergy framework with best practice recommendations that will be disseminated through the awareness-raising campaign. It will also provide agile IP management training to multi-professionals, including at least 27 multipliers across Europe, through an easy-to-use curriculum promoting the concerted IP-OS approach. Outcomes will enable researchers, higher education institutions, and research organizations to support open science practices more effectively by applying the as open as possible, as closed as necessary principle to their research assets. Now, let me introduce you to Mr. Chris Morrison. He is a member of the advisory board of IP4OS, and everything he will say will be highly relevant to our project. He is the head of copyright and licensing at the Bodleian Libraries, University of Oxford, responsible for copyright licensing, policy, education, and support. He started his career in the music industry and has held copyright-related roles at the British Library and the University of Kent. He is co-author with Dr. Jane Secker of the book Copyright and E-Learning, A Guide for Practitioners, second edition, Facet. He co-founded the blog copyrightliteracy.org and associated podcast Copyright Waffle, very entertaining, and is originator of Copyright the Card Game. He has a master's with distinction in copyright law from King's College London. And I have to add, in all modesty, that this is one of the things we have in common. And here's a shout out to Professor Tanya Epling, who might be listening to the recording at some point. Dear Chris, please tell us about your work. To you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Eliana. I'm delighted to be here. It's really great to be part of this project and to see the people who I was lucky enough to meet earlier this year in Germany. So more of that in a moment. But yeah, thank you very much. So I'm here talking about the library view on intellectual property and open science. So you can see here currently, this isn't actually a view from my office when I am in Oxford. Would that it were. This is the Dreaming Spires. Where my team is actually based is in a mile out of town in the Osney Mead Industrial Estate. We actually call it the Dreaming Pylons because actually we have a view of an industrial estate and a car park. But nevertheless, this is where I am lucky enough to work. The University of Oxford is quite a well-known university, and the Bodleian Library similarly one of the most well-known research libraries in UK and Europe, and in fact in the world. So the mission of the Bodleian Libraries is to provide an excellent service to support the learning, teaching and research objectives of the University of Oxford, and to develop and maintain access to Oxford's unique collections for the benefit of scholarship and society. So here are some statistics. We have approximately 27,000 students, more postgraduates than undergraduates. It is, I think, as many people are aware, a extremely research intensive university. Research income is getting on for £1 billion per year, and we have a number of different departments across various academic divisions. So it's the largest academic library service in the UK, one of the largest in Europe, and it's actually Bodleian Libraries. The reason it's plural is because it's not just one library, it's actually 26 academic libraries covering a wide range of specialisms. And in fact, at the university, not all the libraries at the University of Oxford are part of the Bodleian Libraries, because the colleges have their own libraries and they have them in other places as well. So I don't know what the figure is off the top of my head, but we probably have getting on for, if not more than 100 libraries as part of the university. So libraries is quite a big deal in the place where I work. Our collections, going back to the Bodleian, more than 13 million printed items, large numbers of e-journals, special collections, unique collections. And we've been around for more than 400 years as the country's first library of legal deposit. So actually, when it comes to copyright law, the Bodleian actually has an important part to play in the development and the history of copyright and legal deposit. They're not quite the same thing, but they're very closely linked. If you want to find out more, I would recommend listening to the podcast with Richard Ovenden, who is Bodlei's librarian, who is my ultimate boss. Gives us a very entertaining history of how the Bodleian came about and how that relates to what we do today. The other thing to say about the Bodleian Libraries is it's literally is this library. So again, not the place where I actually turn up and work, but many of the parts of what makes the Bodleian so special are its historic buildings and history and heritage of containing these fantastic, wonderful collections. And I recently was lucky enough to go on a tour of the old Bodleian, where we actually find out about more of this. So if ever you're in Oxford, I would recommend getting a tour of the library. While we're on pop culture references, I thought I might also just reiterate how pleased I am to be part of the IP4OS project and to be part of a European project. I think it's important for us to continue to collaborate. Here is the cheesy photo that I was lucky enough to have a snap of in January when I visited Hamburg. So for those of you that don't know, the story of the Beatles, one of my major obsessions, and also a topic of a two-part podcast on Copyright Waffle about the Beatles' history and how it relates to copyright. The Beatles' formative moment was when they went to Hamburg between 1961 and 1962. And this is a picture of John Lennon that was used in one of his 1970s albums, taken in a famous doorway, and I was able to get that cheesy snap taken here. But really, it was actually the involvement of European influences and looking outside just their own country that allowed the Beatles to become the phenomenon that they were. Not that I'm suggesting what I've been doing is equivalent to that, but it was quite a moving experience for me anyway to go back there, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity to collaborate. So my background, as I've Eliana mentioned, I have worked in the music industry for PRS for Music, a collecting society. That's how I got involved in copyright. So it's a collective management organization that represents the interests of composers and songwriters and therefore collects royalties. So I was there for nearly 10 years before moving to the British Library, where I had a very similar job to the one I have now in terms of its scope, to be providing training and policy. But then I was at the University of Kent, and again, that was where I worked again for nearly 10 years in a similar role. And lucky enough to study at King's College London, and the bottom two logos are the university bodies that represent the interests of universities, and I am on the negotiating group that provides responses to consultations on copyright, more of which later, as well as negotiating collective licenses that benefit the university sector. But the logo in the middle there is the copyright literacy logo. So I'm going to be focusing my comments today really centering around this concept of copyright literacy, and I'll explain a bit more what that is and how it works in practice. So this is the blog, Copyright Literacy, that I run with Dr. Jane Secker. You can see her there in the picture in the top left, and that is related to our event Ice Pops, which I'll talk about later. So we post all of our research, put our resources on there, and we have guest posts from others as well, talking about things that do relate to copyright literacy. We are also co-chairs of a special interest group, which is part of the Association for Learning Technology in the UK, a membership organisation that represents those working with learning technology, educational developers, learning technologists. And we've been running a series of webinars since lockdown. It was something that wasn't previously there, but then during the pandemic, we thought it would be useful to bring the community together. And it's then turned into a regular series of webinars that is now takes place on a monthly basis. And we have had 75 of these on various topics. So the archive is there that's available to look at, and there may be some useful, there definitely are some useful, relevant talks there. I would very much hope that we could have an IP4OS presentation and our webinars. Open invitation, Julia and colleagues. We would really love you to have on a slot on this. You would be talking to a community of copyright specialists, primarily in UK university libraries, but also elsewhere. And I'm sure we'd love to hear what your plans are and how things are progressing. So copyright literacy, this is the definition that Jane and I came up with: acquiring and demonstrating the appropriate knowledge, skills, and behaviours to enable the ethical creation and use of copyright material. So what we mean by this is it's more than just understanding what's written in the legislation. Doesn't necessarily mean to be able to act as a lawyer or provide legal advice. It's about not just the knowledge, it's not just the skills in terms of how you kind of work with the law, how you find authoritative sources of information, but it's also about how you put those into action. It's about the behaviors. And to that extent, we use the term literacy because it comes from the field of information and digital literacies. And these in this context, what we mean by literacies, and there is a large body of academic research into this, is about cultural and communicative practices. So it's about how people respond and how they respond within the environment where there are certain laws in place, but also other structures and power dynamics in place that will have an impact on how people perceive these laws and what they end up doing as a result of them. So in practice, what does that look like? Here we go, we've got it under a magnifying glass. Number one, we talk about education rather than training. I mean, I do use the term training. I'm not saying we shouldn't say it. I know it's something that's come up in the project. But what happens if we talk about training is often we think about functional skills rather than broader critical perspectives on topics. We often will fall into this idea that there is a clear set of procedural steps that you can take to come out with a good answer. I've seen a lot of things in copyright where can we create a flowchart to come up with the idea, yes, you can use this, no, we can't use that. I'm very wary of those, particularly because that's not how, in my view, copyright actually works in practice. So education is broader understanding of the issues, the kind of thing that we would expect people coming into a higher education environment to be learning. They're not coming here to learn procedures by rote, but to question and create and synthesize new insights. there needs to be a balance between content and approach. What I mean by that is, as those of us involved in the law know, we love how technical and complicated it is, because it's something to get your teeth into, and obviously there's an awful lot there. But the approach that we take to teaching copyright and talking about these issues has to be in balance with that. If it's all about looking at the black letter of the law, it's clearly only part of the picture, and can be quite alienating to people. That's certainly when I first started getting involved in this area and teaching it. I see a lot of glazed expressions and people falling asleep as I spoke about how the law was structured and what various provisions said. Avoiding binaries is a really important aspect of this, and this will come as I continue the rest of my presentation. There's a tendency to say, is it okay if I do this? Is it right or is it wrong? What's best, this or that? Who's going to win this fight, them or them? And it's like, okay, can understand why we fall into that, because we want to simplify things. But that doesn't actually work. We are not, it's not an us versus them. It's not a right versus wrong. There are any number of different considerations that you need to often weigh up when thinking about copyright and broader intellectual property rights, and thinking about how you bring a product to market that has valuable intellectual property associated with it. Ultimately, this is about getting comfortable with uncertainty. This is a thing that we have been saying to our library community for some time. I don't think people generally like uncertainty, and certainly in a library world where they are presented with a lot of complicated issues, sometimes it feels uncomfortable to not know exactly what the outcome will be of something. But unfortunately, and fortunately in some ways, that is the way the law works. Unfortunately, because it's complicated and it's time consuming, and it can bring with it some anxiety, which we'll talk about later. But it's fortunate to the extent that the law is flexible. It's deliberately flexible in order to allow us to make judgments on a case-by-case basis, and we want it to remain so. Otherwise, it has negative impacts on how we do research and how we support those doing research, and all associated activities. I don't like to see there as being really necessarily a distinction even between research and education. Again, I think that's an unhelpful binary, because all of these things all flow into each other within the realm of scholarship. So, how do we do that balancing between the content approach? How do we avoid binaries? How do we do education, not training? Jane and I have for some time been taking a playful approach to copyright, partly because it's fun and it avoids it being boring, but actually because we think it is one of the most helpful ways we can think about complicated and sometimes contentious topics. So Copyright the Card Game was the first game that we produced back in 2014. And the genesis of this was the fact that at that time, the UK had just put in place reforms to copyright law that were based on the ones that were available according to the EU 2001 Information Society Directive. So that directive said all member states of the EU could add exceptions to their law on various things. So it was a great opportunity, and it's been a really important thing that's happened in the UK, is that we actually now, and since 2014, have had these exceptions to copyright, such as a new text and data mining exception, which I'll come back to later, parody, caricature, pastiche, an illustration for instruction, which is about education, which is much broader than what we had before, in order to allow digital uses of material. Now, the thing with exceptions is they're great, but what we found very quickly was those in the library community and elsewhere didn't necessarily know what to do with them, how to transfer that into policy, how to enable that guidance, how to make decisions on a case-by-case basis, because up to that the law had been very restrictive. And in many of these examples, or many of these new legal provisions, we had the concept of fair dealing being the UK equivalent, in fact precursor to fair use in the US. it came before that, which is allowing fair uses of material. So before I say any more on that, I'll just give you some of the icons and the overview of what's in the game. Number one, we talk about the works that copyright protects: literary, artistic, musical, dramatic works, typographical arrangements, sound recordings, films, and broadcasts. We talk about usages, which is what is actually called restricted acts in the regulation, but we don't like to talk about the term restriction, but this is copying, distributing copy to the public, public performance, communication to the public, rental, lending, and adaptation. Then we have a whole section here, and we play the game in different rounds. So each team, we put people into teams and they play rounds, and we present them with scenarios, and they use the cards where all the information is to select these. So we've got the legal uses with permission, and that's under licenses of various different types. But then here we have also copyright exceptions, the legal uses without permission, and you can see quotation, illustration for instruction, recording of broadcasts, and various things relating to libraries. Unfortunately, that one at the bottom right is an EU orphan works exception, which we no longer have access to. So there we are. But the key thing about this is that we have these four different concepts, but we also then come back to risk. And risk is an important part of the game, because if you're going to be using copyright material, it's not always clear whether what you're doing is lawful or could be infringing. So you need to balance that up against whether you think the copyright holder will find out about it, whether they'll have a problem with it, and what the implications would be if you were challenged. So that's the card game. We created an event to talk and share our ideas and allow those in our community to share ideas of creative and maybe playful approaches to copyright education. So IcePops is the international copyright literacy event with playful opportunities for practitioners and scholars. So this is the 6th edition coming up this year, and we are delighted that for the first time we are leaving the UK. We are embracing the I part of IcePops in making it international, and we have been invited to host it at Harvard Law School with the, quite frankly, library copyright rock star that is Kyle K. Courtney. Those of you that haven't heard Kyle speak, you really should tune into something that he will be a guest on our Copyright Waffle. He has done presentations at our webinars, and he is a fantastic colleague, and it is definitely, we're very pleased to be reaching that US audience, and again talking to people in North America about their experiences of doing the things that we are trying to do over here on the other side of the Atlantic. So we haven't opened bookings yet, but those of you, if you can actually come to IcePops on the 23rd to the 25th of July in Harvard, it promises to be a fantastic experience with some, I know it's going to be brilliant. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that now and move on instead to the game, The Publishing Trap. Now, The Publishing Trap is of particular relevance to IP4OS. It is a game that Jane and I created, our second game, the difficult second album syndrome. Copyright card game came out almost without any effort, it seemed. It was just the idea was fully formed. With this one, we had to work very hard at it because it's kind of a fusing of two different board games. One is Mousetrap, which I don't know if people are aware of Mousetrap. It is a game in which you build a model and then you try to trap the mouse at the end of it. And the idea that I had was academic publishing is kind of like it's a system where knowledge and money is traveling around, and you could always build a physical 3D model of it and see what happens to the knowledge and where it gets caught up behind paywalls and all that kind of thing. It was quite an ambitious concept. Jane's idea was more about the academic game of life. Look at characters trying to make their way through their research careers and what kind of decisions would they need to make in order to allow others to access their research outputs, but also to allow their research to be sustainable, and to make sure they've thought through the implications of where they may be liable for certain things. So eventually we got it together. It's been through a number of iterations. We're now currently got the version 2.0 is the one that's available on our website, so it can be downloaded for free. It is an openly licensed open education resource. And there are 4 characters. In fact, there's 8 characters now. We're just trialing with an additional 4 ones. And you can see a little picture there of Mary Mercurial, who is an astrophysicist and one of the characters from the game. So here's a picture of some very happy librarians playing the publishing track. This was largely from a trip we did to the University of Cambridge a number of years ago. That board that's there on the bottom right is actually the first iteration, version 1 game. The second one is much improved, but it's not just about having fun as well. I think this really does help think through some of the complications about how this whole system works. So what I thought I would do is show you some slides from round 5. So we actually, even though there's a board, we actually have a fully online version that you can do online. Best if you do it in the room, and I'm really looking forward to demonstrating this actually in more depth when the project team does come to visit us in the UK in June. So at this point, round 5, you've been offered some consultancy work that will earn you extra money as well as potentially have a considerable impact. So in the game, you get impact, you get knowledge points, and you also get money at particular points that allows you to then do certain things with it. Here's a couple of scenarios, 2 of the characters. So Brian, who's a microbiologist, at this point in the game is offered a consultancy job with a pharmaceutical company in sub-Saharan Africa, searching for a cure for a viral infection which is affecting the local population. There was no vaccine, but the data appears promising. We came up with this scenario prior to 2020, just to say. And then it has, subsequently playing it, has become an interesting discussion point. Mary, the astrophysicist that you saw before, has been offered work for the National Space Agency, who are investigating black holes on the edge of the known universe. She's heading up the team who will analyze samples of dark matter being collected by deep space probes. So what we ask people is a number of questions at each point in the game. And in this one, it's a fairly simplistic set of choices. Do you decide to share your data openly? And do you get in touch with the research office? So it's basically around the IP that's going to be generated from the consultancy. You are advised to speak to your research office, but are you very busy? And what we've typically moved towards is a rolling of the dice at this point, because clearly the obvious answer is yes, you want to be as open as possible, as closed as necessary, and of course you want to speak to your knowledgeable colleagues in your research or innovation office. We then ask at each point in the game for each team, beginning they're playing in teams representing a character, to answer the questions by completing a set of questions. So there's real, I think, opportunity to expand this out more, and I'm interested in continuing those conversations. But just to say, here's a quote from an article that Jane and I wrote about playing games with copyright, that we have found that teaching others about copyright through play has a power beyond the engaging and fun aspects. Indeed, it can be argued that playing games with copyright is an inherently political act because it enables a more critical engagement with the law. It allows people to come together in communities of practice to question assumptions about copyright and build confidence to challenge the status quo. And that's from an article that we wrote in the Journal of Play in Adulthood. And we're very lucky to have found that there is, in fact, a whole field of people working in playfulness, in adult and in serious context, which we're really encouraged by. A quick note on copyright anxiety. I mentioned anxiety. This is actually the topic of a research project that I've been working on in conjunction with Jane at City University of London and Amanda Wackeruk, who is based at the University of Alberta. So it's actually a comparison between responses from people working in the UK higher education or university sector and people in the Canadian university sector. So Amanda created the copyright anxiety scale along with her colleague Celine Garreau-Brennan, who both of them based at the University of Alberta. So we've teamed up with them, bringing our copyright literacy angle, and are in the process. We have a research article in the Journal of Copyright in Education and Librarianship coming out imminently. It's in press, And what this shows is copyright anxiety is a significant, it's non-trivial and observable phenomenon within higher education. People are worried they don't know enough about copyright. They feel that they are worried and confused about it. And over 50% of people say that their activities, whether that be teaching or research, have been hampered or basically blocked by copyright law and the way that it works. And there's a number of reasons for that, and we're going into that. And so watch this space. If you want to find out more, we will be presenting at various places over the coming months. So I've got a slide here which is thinking about, it's taking a step back, IP management, open science scholarships and libraries. What are the common themes that we talk about here? I've got this image of, on the left, I've put some books to kind of represent knowledge in its purest form, and the fact that information and access to information is kind of what libraries are here for. But money is important here, and there needs to be a balance between, and again, in the publishing trap game, we have money, we have knowledge, we have impact as well, but not necessarily talking about impact so much here, but money and knowledge. Now, the common themes here are the discussions I have both within the library community and with colleagues who work more in the IP management, knowledge transfer space. And then in the world which is specifically looking at openness, we refer to it as open scholarship at the Bodleian. I'm in our open scholarship support team rather than open science, because we feel that that's a more expansive and inclusive term, because we talk to people in all fields of academic endeavour. So library's mission is clearly there to provide access to information, and but also it's in today's world is very much a part and a partner of knowledge creation, open access, and our library's involvement in creating the models under which research can be openly shared. It's fundamental to that, and as you all know very well, it is an extremely involved space where we are still in a major transition, and libraries are doing an awful lot of work on that. As I've mentioned, I provide copyright guidance, risk management. It's sort of within what is it's at the heart of what the copyright card game is attempting to do, but it reflects the fact that libraries are often responsible for providing copyright guidance. It's not necessarily something that libraries signed up for, but over time and through the development of licenses and collective licenses, for example, that institutions have to manage, the copyright function responsibility often falls to a library. I'm very lucky in that I'm in a role in which it is actually recognized that I am full-time on copyright and I'm able to talk to this. Many in the library world have it as an add-on to their job, or an expectation that they can do. They can come up with all the answers that everyone needs, which is actually a very difficult situation to be in. But it comes, as I've mentioned before, risk management is a very important part of this, because you don't necessarily know whether something's in copyright or it isn't, whether what you're doing is fair or not, whether what you're doing is covered by a license or covered explicitly by an exception. So you have to use risk management, which is doing something even though you're not sure if there may be a negative consequence further down the line. And this, for me, it resonates with this idea of what innovation and entrepreneurship is all about. This project that we're all working on is there to inspire innovation and align innovation and openness. But sometimes I think we can assume that libraries aren't innovative or entrepreneurial because they're just these big old-fashioned institutional buildings that just take in books and put them on shelves and catalog things according to preordained bibliographic systems. But actually that's not true at all. Libraries are at the forefront of innovation and entrepreneurship. I think I would say innovation to the extent that we are looking how new technologies are impacting the work we do, how we can help steer the conversation around what are the best frameworks in order to support research, and entrepreneurship to the extent, I mean, we work very, very closely with those that are creating new knowledge and things that could have market potential. But I think, when it comes to making your risk management decision, I've advocated for a long time that librarians need to think entrepreneurially, not entrepreneurially to the extent that we are there to make a profit, certainly those of us who are working in non-for-profit libraries, but we are taking a risk in order to further the whole of the academic enterprise. And we need to think entrepreneurially, I think, rather than institutionally when we're in taking in that role. And the final thing I wanted to say here is commercial versus non-commercial activity. This is one of the things that's baked into our laws. It's baked into the European directive that we were required to put that in place in UK law back in the early 2000s. It's a very, very difficult thing to define. It becomes very challenging. What is commercial? What's non-commercial? You could argue this day in, day out. But I also think sometimes in library world, I know I have conversations, people think that commercial is inherently bad and non-commercial is inherently good. Again, this is an unhelpful binary. Commercial activity is essential for us to have scholarship. We live in a world where we have money as a system, and we need to work with it. So commercial isn't necessarily bad, non-commercial isn't necessarily good, and we need to be thinking in more inclusive and imaginative ways about these things. So I realize my time is getting short, so I'm just going to really whiz through here what I think is a useful case study, which is the current UK consultation on copyright and artificial intelligence. This is the thing that has eaten my day job. I am spending all my waking hours thinking about this and contributing to this. The deadline is next Tuesday. Thanks a lot, UK government, for releasing this just before Christmas and telling us all we had, 2 months to respond to it, where actually we do need to take time off over Christmas. Anyway, here we are. The problem that I see, the main problem that the colleagues and I have seen, is that this perpetuates the way that this consultation is framed, the copyright wars narrative, where you have the dinosaur old industries of publishing and broadcasting and traditional media versus the upstart robots of Silicon Valley. And clearly there is a tension there. There's a dynamic that's going on here, but it's way more nuanced and complex than that. And this is a slide that I don't intend to go into a huge detail. It's my way of explaining what the intellectual property questions are around generative AI models. You've got different types of copyright protected work going into a box. Is that okay? Are there copies in it? Does it have a memory? And what about the outputs? Is there copyright in it? Who owns it? How do you openly license work? What about infringement? Who's liable? What about parody pastiche? There are many, many more questions. This is not an exhaustive thing. This is something that I came up with just as a sort of starter for 10 of how I was framing this. And this is then, there is a raging debate here about artificial intelligence, what it means for openness and what it means for commercial activity, because the UK proposals for the new UK laws are around making a distinction, continuing the distinction between commercial and non-commercial activity. That's not the same thing that's happening elsewhere in the world. In the US, they have the fair use doctrine, and there are a number of different court cases ongoing. So you'll see here a visualization by Wired magazine, which is very helpful, quite entertaining, who's suing who. That's what's in that image. You can follow the link when you see all the slides. In the EU, we have the text and data mining legislative solution that's laid out in the Digital Single Market Directive, which makes a distinction between research institutions and those who are not research institutions, with an opt-out system, which is proving to be challenging to put in place. And again, in the EU level, we now have something of a backlash regarding the AI directive where people are saying, oh, well, we wrote this thing, but we didn't realize generative AI was coming along, and now we want to fight it and we want to change it, and there's a loophole, and copyright law is now destroying the livelihoods of creators. In Asia, and particularly in China, there is developing policy. And what I've got a link to here is a paper by Professors Matthew Sagg and Peter K. Yu, which is about the globalization of copyright exceptions for AI training. It's a really clear and helpful intervention that is really saying, well, we're probably all heading towards just saying there is largely a permitted use of copyright works for training AI. We'll have to watch this space to see what happens. My final point here, and I think I've said this already, I'm looking forward to seeing the proper public website for the IP4OS project, because I think it's really timely. I think so many of these issues that I've talked about, that I've been experiencing throughout my time working in a research and an academic environment, are about the fact that we all want the same thing. We're just talking different languages. And I've had conversations with colleagues where I'm advocating for openness because I am an open practitioner. I have a job within openness, and their responsibility is to generate revenue. And ultimately, those two are not in conflict with each other. Sometimes they rub up against each other. You need to order things in the right way. And I think that's really the value of what we're talking about here. And so libraries have an incredibly important part to play in that. And I'd like to bring all my library colleagues along in that conversation, and see how we can really genuinely create something new and innovative and helpful as part of this project. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the project. Thank you for inviting me to talk today. And I'm very happy if anybody wants to contact me to get in touch. It might be after the deadline for the consultation when I actually get back to you. But I look forward to working with you all. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was impressive, and I wish you could go on for more than.
I could go on and on forever and ever.
A webinar at some point on AI and copyright.
Well, we actually, I should have mentioned that there is a copyright and AI webinar, which is the next one. So let me just get the link to that, because that's happening next month, and we have colleagues from Academic Libraries North who are going to be speaking at that event, and they've been doing thinking. I also see that my colleague Alex Fenlon, who works at the University of Birmingham, is on the call today, and he actually was a guest at one of our webinars and has been doing a lot of work in the similar space. So yeah, we've got a good bunch of people, and we would love to have the IP4OS community to join us.
Lovely. I'm sure we will come back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Julia mainly. Right. Well, we have a question. We have two questions. Great. Julia says, thank you. Do you think we have good examples on concerted IP and OS practices under our current policy circumstances?
When you say do we have them, I'm not sure if you mean do we have them in my particular institution or in the UK, or just more broadly, is there places where we see good work being done? I'm fascinated to find out what happened. I know there's part of this process to ask for institutions within each of the member states to come up with case studies or examples or how they're going to work together. Just trying to think, can IP and OS practice? I mean, I am now a member of the University of Oxford's IP advisory group, intellectual property advisory group, that largely meets to look at disputes that arise, not entirely, but often it is about disputes that arise about the creating spin-outs and share of revenue sharing under our current policies. So I think there's scope. I think there's enormous scope. I think what I've seen is perhaps, a sort of in talking to colleagues when I came to Keele University in January. I think there's a general sense, and I remember Tim Errington saying this, that it's not that people are sort of working in against each other. It's just that something will go into the system. If it goes to the IP management people, knowledge transfer, if it's not of interest to them, how does that, and there isn't really a commercialization opportunity, how does the researcher and the research team find their way back into openness? It's about rooting things. I think that. So I think that's a long way of saying I don't think off the top of my head I can think of good examples, but I don't want that to come across as a, oh no, it's all dreadful, we're not doing anything good, because I'm sure there are things happening. I mean, I would ask other people to, I'm not necessarily send them to me, but I guess to send those examples through to you, Julia, if they relate to anything that I have mentioned here.
We have more questions. Gautam says, there was a classic case from India where a photocopy shop owner at Delhi School of Economics was sued by Oxford University Press because he was photocopying materials for education and selling to students. In that context, how much copyrights law permits distribution when it comes to access to education, given that those books were quite expensive for the
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Gautam, for that question. I am aware of that that court case. Clearly, I may need to be somewhat careful about what I say, given that I do work to a certain extent with Oxford University Press, and also I'm not here to sort of discuss the specific commercial tactics of any particular organisation. In this case, it was found that it was fair dealing for photocopies to be made in this context, which might sound quite strange, because surely copyright law there is to prevent copies from being made. But this is about that whole thing about exceptions and risks. So this is under exceptions under Indian copyright law, which is broadly based on the laws we have here because of our heritage and the UK's colonial past. But actually, in that local context, it was seen differently by the Indian courts because each country is slightly different, and that's the interesting thing I find about copyright is we have a tradition of collective licensing when it comes to making educational materials available. I'm part of the team that negotiates the CLA license. But in every country, there's a different history in terms of how the law was constructed and about which commercial entities and were operating and how they set up their business model. So there's a lot to be said there, but I think all I would say to generalize on that, what that case shows is there is always a balance between giving rights holders exclusive rights so that they are able to get a return on their investment, and providing the flexibility in the law so that they are not absolute monopoly exclusive rights, so that students are able to make copies for their own educational abilities. And that's something that I am arguing for in the AI copyright and AI consultation. I think it's important that we don't have a knee-jerk reaction to a new technology coming in and feel that what we need to do is immediately strengthen copyright law to stop a bad thing happening. Because what you'll end up doing is you're limiting the activities of researchers and students and people who ultimately cannot afford the prices if there is this exclusive monopoly on behalf of rights holders.
Right. Thank you very much. I think, Gautam, I think you have your answer. There's more. Chris?
Yes.
Katarina says, thank you for your fantastic speech. Chris, very interesting and important. My question is, given the growing importance of copyright and licensing in the digital economy, how can initiatives like IP4OS help SMEs and startups navigate complex licensing frameworks to ensure both compliance and commercial success? What do you think?
That's a really
Do you think
interesting question.
we
Yeah.
can have another webinar on that?
I mean, I would be very, very interested to hear from SMEs and startups about what their issues are. I mean, I don't advise them. If I get contacted by someone looking to start up a business, it's not my responsibility to provide advice on that basis. I talk to Oxford researchers, but if they are actually looking to commercialize, I will pass them on to our Oxford University Innovation OUI, who deal with those. But I think there is some real value here, because actually SMEs and startups are presented with challenges in the way that academic researchers are. And again, as we've been saying, they may be one and the same person. You know, you might be doing your academic research and then with an eye to doing a spin out or licensing, registering and licensing patents. Um, Again, it's something in the consultation response on AI. I've been saying commercial and non-commercial blur into each other. And in fact, again, if we strengthen copyright law to make licensing of works for training and for computational analysis, if we make that the default and we strengthen the licensing situation, it locks out startups and SMEs because they don't have the funds. So the incumbent tech companies can afford to pay the licensing fees, but if you're trying to start up, then you can't. So I think there's definitely information that can help and help them understand the risks, but it's quite a different situation. Of course, the more you are advising startups that may be doing things and maybe operating according to the Silicon Valley of move fast, you know, their values move fast and break things. You know, let's do something quickly and work out what the legal implications of it are later. That is definitely a dynamic. That's something that I don't get heavily involved in for good reason, but I think it's something to be aware of. And I think it's a really important thing that IP4OS should be talking about. That we can't just separate things into neat commercial, non-commercial boxes and think that works. And I'm just looking at Alex's comment here saying there's a disconnect between commercialization activity and openness and non-commercial uses. Exactly. It's these things aren't necessarily all understood from the same perspective by everyone, and I think that's where IP4OS brings such potential value in linking that together.
Yeah, thank you, and Alex for that. Stefan has a question as well. I'll move on directly to his question. What chance is there to see breaking down some of the mythology around copyright and moving the copyright debate towards what supports wider policy goals such as innovation?
Okay, let me see if I can see that. Okay. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I mean, I've talked about the playfulness already. We do, I mean, the reason we do, Jane and I have created these, and I don't think we were, as I said, necessarily aware that we were doing it at first, is there are some really important threshold concepts going on here. So we've referred in some of our research, and this is Jane's area of specialism rather than mine, because she's an educational developer, and I'm looking forward to Jane and Yulia talking to each other about educational side of things. Is that threshold concepts unlock a whole load of further insights and behaviors. So when if you're learning something new, when you go to university, you actually find yourself in this liminal space where you're exposed to these new ideas and new concepts, and it can be quite an uncomfortable space to be in and during that time you're sort of mimicking the people around you or the thoughts of what you're seeing, and then there comes a point where it kind of clicks. So I think that for us, many of the things we're talking about when it comes to copyright literacy and critical copyright literacy are sort of threshold concepts that I think will allow the people involved in the space to realize it's not just yet another irritating administrative task that the library or the research office are making me do, but realize this goes to the very heart of what creating knowledge and communicating it is about. And therefore, I see some of again, it's frustrating to see the knee-jerk reactions to the AI and copyright debate in the popular media. It's understandable, but I think the odds are stacked against us. But Stephen, I'm very glad that that we're working together. I know that IFLA, for whom you work and do excellent work, I've been working on this for a long time and are involved in projects like this and Knowledge Rights 21 that's working across Europe to do that. So there's good work there, but for me it's something I think that we all need to be working on as hard as we can.
Right, I think it's time for us, unfortunately, to wrap up. And thank you, Chris, for sharing with us so much information and telling us what keeps you up at night, namely the government consultation.
It has been of recently, yes, it has, yeah.
We've learned a lot about the publishing trap already. It amuses me a lot, and it's really for those.
And in fact, I have the game here. I have the game in the bag. So this is just a tantalizing trailer. There's actually a board, and there's tokens, and there's all sorts. So that's all to look forward to.
And it's also interesting for those who don't know our project that the publishing trap is a summary, curiously, about our project. No, number 5 of the
round
game.
Round five is IP4OS in a nutshell. Yes, I think so.
Amazing. Thank you for telling us about the creative and playful approaches to copyright. I wish I knew all about that when I was in my doing my copyright masters with Tanya.
And I would also just say, Eliana, there is currently no civil law version of the card game. We've got a Brazilian researcher working on it, but we have yet to have a civil law version. So there's my invitation to you.
Thank you so much. I'll take that with great honor and interest. We'll be in touch then. Yeah.
Okay.
And thank you for also for telling us about the concept of copyright literacy and how it has helped those working in libraries and research.
Yes.
Navigate the complex world of copyright.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Oh, can I just say one last thing? I just wanted to have a shout out to Professor Tanya Todorova, who is based in Sofia in Bulgaria. It was actually her that coined the phrase copyright literacy, and it came from a multinational study that she began in, I think, 2013, 2014. So that's where we got it from. We didn't invent it. So big shout out to Tanya Todorova, who is an inspiration to us.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Chris. Keep in touch. Bye.
Right. Bye.